Whose fault was it? And maybe it's all of our faults. That seems to be what some Biden administration officials are suggesting, that the possibility of climate change was the cause of the building collapse. It's remarkable. But here is the remarkable Jennifer Granholm. She's, I'm seriously, she's our energy secretary. No, I'm not kidding. She was actually a governor of Michigan. Seriously. I know you think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. It's true.
Do you think that climate could have played a role in that building's collapse?
Well, obviously, we don't know fully, but we do know that the seas are rising. I mean, we know that we're losing inches and inches of beaches, not just in Florida, but all around. Lake Michigan, where I'm from, we've seen the loss of beaches because the waters are rising.
Wait a minute.
I live right next to Lake Michigan and Lake Point Tower. Maybe I should be calling for an evacuation.
Why don't you have a structural engineer in there as well? Here's the deal on the rising of Lake Michigan water. Okay, so 2020 they put out this alarmist thing. Okay, highest level of water that you've ever seen. Well, 6 years ago, prior to that, it was the lowest level, and they were worried about Lake Michigan draining itself.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
Well, here's the thing. And then she went on to flack for the infrastructure bill. With the infrastructure bill, are we going to build private condo buildings? What the hell are you talking about? Peter Ducey, Fox News, followed up with EPA Administrator Michael Regan yesterday on the very topic of what the Secretary Granholm had to say. And here's what EPA Administrator Michael Regan had to say.
Do you agree with the Energy Secretary Granholm that it's possible the Surfside condos collapse may be a result of climate change?
I don't know if we have enough information at this point. What I'll say is EPA, both our headquarters and our regional offices, are coordinating with the state of Florida and folks in that region to really understand what's happening on the ground and be sure that we're deploying adequate resources to keep those actions safe for those folks.
Whatever that means. Okay. Can't rule out climate change. Well, some of the details coming out from Condo Association correspondence with contractors. About 3 years ago, engineers noted design flaws and failing waterproofing that would lead to their, quote, exponential damage, unquote, in the Champlain Towers South condominium complex. The documents include an unverified 40-year inspection report that had been received 16 hours after the building's catastrophic failure, and correspondence from the Condo Association to contractors about spalling, cracking concrete, and other visible structural damage that may indicate more substantial damage that is unseen but couldn't be identified until you actually got into a full and complete inspection. For more on this, the engineering piece of it, let's try to stick to what we know as opposed to throwing out ridiculous theories, as is happening from a lot of quarters, frankly. Embarrassing. Pleased to be joined by Professor Gongkang Fu. He's a professor of civil and architectural engineering at IIT. Professor Fu, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, based on what we know from what has been put into the public domain about the condo association management of the building, the inspections that had been done, and some of the initial reviews of professionals in the space that were being contracted, or that were in the process of getting contracted by the condo association to do repairs to the building. They were going to do a $15 million special assessment to do these repairs to the building. Is there anything obvious to you that somebody should have seen or known something that would have indicated, or that indicated to them, or should have indicated to them, that there was something catastrophic that was possible at any moment? Is anything obvious that people overlooked that shouldn't have been overlooked?
Well, it doesn't seem to be the case based on the public information so far. Yes, some issues were identified in that the 2018 inspection report. However, no timeline was given, and I don't know if anyone will be able to give the timeline as to what might happen next and when, and particularly in this case, collapse of the entire building. I don't think anybody would have doubted it. So that's what I see so far. But sometime down the road, there might be more things coming up, to tell us, to answer that question.
And one of the other, and this is sort of anecdotal from residents and so forth, but perhaps this is something that repeats itself over and over when you're talking about buildings of this size and close together with one another. We're talking about beachfront property. But residents saying recent construction at a nearby building was having an effect on their units. Some of the units, they noticed cracking in the walls and other such damage being done to their condos that you felt like the building was shifting, and they attributed it to the construction that was going on nearby. Is that a possibility that could have exacerbated whatever structural infirmities existed in the building?
I guess right now nothing is impossible, but we don't have adequate data to tell us that is what happened. Let's face it, if you are nearby a large construction site, you would feel something. How many times did we feel that it's hazardous, it's even dangerous? We probably didn't. So, however, for this case, such a catastrophe has happened. So I don't think the government agencies would exclude anything at this point. If I understand it correctly, based on what I have read, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is involved. It's a government agency that has the responsibility to investigate such incidents.
Well, and they do these 40-year, any building that's 40 years old in Florida has a required inspection that must be recertified for electrical and structural safety after 40 years. And this building was built in 1980 or 81, so it was right here for their 40-year inspection. But the question is, is there, again, any reason now, not on the condo side, the management side, but on the regulatory side, the government side, is there anything obvious that inspectors didn't do that they should have done that could have caught this before, obviously, the collapse happened?
I don't see right now, as far as the public information goes. On the other hand, as a structural engineer myself, licensed to perform such work, possibly, I think that 40 years is too long.
40 years is too long. It's the recertification should be in a shorter time frame, you're saying?
Correct. To catch such possible defects. And apparently, for this case, they are within, the building is within that 40-year limit. And it has collapsed.
Is there an industry standard, or do you see states that have a shorter time frame that you suggest should be replicated? Is there a magic number?
Well, I have a reference for bridges. We do every 2 years inspection.
For
buildings,
bridges, okay.
It's a very variable situation. City by city, they have different requirements.
Right, but is there a best practice, as you suggest, when it comes to multi-story condo buildings?
Not to my immediate knowledge at this point. I'm pretty sure the profession will, the profession of civil engineers and structural engineers will get into this case and get down to the bottom, and hopefully there will be some national standards coming up as a result of this incident.
So how does this work? How does the structural engineers, how does your profession dictate to the on-the-ground building inspector exactly what to look for and what the standards should be. I mean, that's where it should come from. I'm a little bit confused that there aren't clear standards already.
We as a profession, meaning structural engineers, do not make that decision. However, the policy-making agencies or government offices from time to time consult us, getting the professional opinions into these codes. So these codes officially are adopted by government. Just like this case, I think it is the city or maybe the state. I didn't get exactly what that body might be. That said 40 years is interval. And as far as I'm concerned, that is too long. Within 40 years, many things can happen.
Well, it appears to me in this, I'm looking at some of the pictures of what appears, apparently the Wall Street Journal had a big article on this. And I mean, are we back to if you see something, say something? Because some of this stuff looks pretty obvious as needing to be inspected. And certainly the residents and the condo board were kind of discussing this, especially after the 2018 report. It just feels like people failed to take it any further. It reminds me also, Dan, of the bridge that I believe it was over Lakeshore Drive, and they shut down everything because there was visible chunks falling off of the bridge,
right.
and so I mean, are we all inspectors now, or I don't understand the gap here between a building inspector actually not catching this.
Yeah, I actually commented on that Lakeshore Drive northbound incident when it happened on a couple of TV stations. And again, for bridges, we inspect them every 2 years. And some of them actually are inspected more frequently, depending on the situation. So fortunately, for that particular case, it was caught and nobody got hurt. And for this building situation, apparently, the devastating condition was not caught in time and addressed in time, and that's why we saw this catastrophe and such a significant loss of lives.
Yeah, I mean, the condo board president writing to relative to her letter to an engineer named Frank Morabito, it's impossible to know the extent of the damage to the underlying rebar until the concrete is opened up. Oftentimes, the damage is more extensive than can be determined by inspection of the surface. So they see surface indications of structural damage that they were moving to try to correct, perhaps not obviously not as quickly as they should have, but I mean, the question is, was it reasonable for them to have known that at the time, over the last 3 years? And that seems to be an open question. I wonder if, people have talked about the punishment that a building takes and the structural integrity of a building takes from, being that close to the ocean and the seawater. Anything with respect to how buildings are built, the foundation of buildings, how deep they go down with the pylons and so on and so forth. I mean, are those areas of inquiry that are that should be pursued as well?
Of course. Actually, you wouldn't expect HOA president or board members to be able to answer these structural engineering related questions.
Right.
Right.
So, which means the government really should have something more specific. Just like, for example, again, bridge engineering, we have volumes of pages of specifications for engineers to follow, which would not be even possible for people without engineering background to understand. Apparently, for buildings, there is no such information available, even for engineers to refer to.
Well, the only thing, the thing that's interesting here, though, is you have this sister building built by the same developer that's, right across the way. And and you know, and despite some of the hysteria, like this is some sort of contagion and people should evacuate that building too. People aren't evacuating that building because there's not an indication that there's any problem with the structural integrity there. So it just seems to me you've almost got twins located next to each other. This happened to the one building. It didn't happen to the other building. There's got to be something unique or a unique series of variables that occurred that were in play with respect to the building that collapsed versus the other one. And that's why, trying to get to that. I'm not suggesting that anybody has that answer at point, but I'm just saying, this seems to me where the investigation should be directed.
Are you referring to Tower North, Dan?
Right.
Because the
Yes. Right. This is
South.
this is Champlain South, and there's a
Yeah.
north one, right?
Yeah. If I would be the resident in there, I would get out immediately
Why?
because there are so many unknowns at this point, which could cause Tower North to collapse anytime.
Well,
as far as I'm concerned.
Well, but I mean, the only unknown, I guess, with respect to Tower North would be whether or not the cause of the collapse of Tower South was shoddy construction or the shoddy laying of a foundation, right?
But possibly that Tower North shares the same foundation as Tower South.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Right.
Well, quite a few residents are fleeing.
Being so close.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, being so close, you really have to play safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But let me put it this way, let's say in city of Chicago, you see these buildings next to each other, right? Right. I mean, on the street, let's say Michigan Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you are in one building and your next neighbor's building has collapsed, what would you do? I mean, it may come to your building any minute, as far as I'm concerned, as a structural engineer.
Well, it appears that one particular resident says that the building is going to be the safest building in Surfside and in Florida because we're the twin sister to Champlain South. We have engineers coming here every day to use our building as a comparison for the one that collapsed. So residents are making their individual decisions whether to stay or go, it appears.
Yeah, they make their own decisions. Of course, I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
For your own safety, I would move out immediately. And I would never get back into that building until somebody gives me a piece of paper saying that building is safe from an authority.
All right.
And it promises to cover whatever damage that might come. And I'm not going to put my life there.
I'm with you.
He is Gongkang Fu. He's a professor of civil and architectural engineering at IIT. Professor Fu, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in '08, business professionals in trouble.